The New York Times would survive very, very well in a one-newspaper state. It was a mouthpiece for a Marxist regime. If this isn't a coordinated political... Red State does a very good job of explaining what the FBI has done to Project Veritas, and more specifically to James O'Keefe, and it is another disgrace. It's yet another example of what's happening to this country. The FBI raid of Project Veritas turns into a massive scandal, they write, after privileged communications are leaked. Project Veritas has found itself in the crosshairs of the FBI. That began with a raid on the homes of several of its journalists under the guise of looking for Ashley Biden's diary. Apparently, a stolen diary is now in the purview of federal authorities. Will they be investigating the stealing of bicycles next? But what was so disturbing, besides the raids happening, was how quickly the New York Times knew about them. While O'Keefe was asked by the FBI to keep quiet, the New York Times knew within hours, pointing to a leaker within the FBI. Quote, but while the Department of Justice requested us to not discuss the existence of the subpoena, something very unusual happened. Within an hour of one of our reporters' homes being secretly raided by the FBI, this is Project Veritas, the New York Times, who we are currently suing for defamation, contacted Project Veritas reporter for comment. We don't know how the New York Times was aware of the execution of a search warrant at a reporter's home, or the subject matter of the search warrant, as the grand jury investigation is secret. What was leaked by the FBI? It was leaked by the FBI to the New York Times. To the New York Times. Days later, O'Keefe would have his home raided, and sure enough, the Times once again knew about it before anyone else. Are you noticing a pattern? Because it's about to become as obvious as a neon sign. 2 days ago, a court ordered the FBI to stop extracting data from James O'Keefe's phones, which have apparently been seized. Again, all of this is being done under the allegation that a diary was stolen. But it wasn't stolen by James O'Keefe or his reporters for Project Veritas, if it was stolen at all, by the way. But then last night, things boiled over into outright scandal. The New York Times suddenly started publishing privileged communications between Project Veritas and its legal team. Those messages apparently came from one of O'Keefe's phones. You read that right. Project Veritas has recently sued, by the way, the New York Times over an unrelated matter. Now the Times has Project Veritas's privileged communications that reveal their legal strategies. Given the circumstances, there could only be one logical source for that information: the FBI. Liz Wheeler, a very sharp lawyer, she tweeted out, Project Veritas sues the New York Times. The FBI raids O'Keefe's home. The New York Times knows about the raid immediately. The FBI steals O'Keefe's reporter's notes. The New York Times publishes what his notes were. She says this is nuts. The FBI is leaking O'Keefe's privileged information to the New York Times. It's scandalous, folks. Though nothing is really surprising anyone when dealing with the FBI these days. It appears that a major newspaper has colluded with the federal government to target an investigative reporting outlet. Of course, there's still more dots to connect, but it's there. And if it's there, some other explanation, I'm not seeing it, they write. The pretense of the original raid simply made no sense. Really, a diary? And the New York Times has been getting leaks from the Bureau every step of the way in order to target Project Veritas. The New York Times would survive very, very well in a one-newspaper state. It was a mouthpiece for a Marxist regime. If this isn't a coordinated political hit job on a journalistic organization, then what is it? So many lines have now been crossed that it's hard to keep up with them all. Worse, what can Project Veritas even do about it? The Biden-run Department of Justice is not going to investigate these leaks, and the damage has already been done. That's my point. With respect to Bannon and Trump and Meadows and all, there's nowhere to go. The Times now has possession of these privileged communications, even as they're being sued by Project Veritas. Think about how absurd that is. Let this serve as another example of why the FBI doesn't need to just be reprimanded, but that it needs to be disbanded. And I've come to that conclusion, too. We need a new organization built from the bottom up. The FBI needs to be eliminated because in too many ways it's now become a domestic surveillance and arm of the big government, central government. Only for the Democrats, by the way. The Democrats, you notice, never talk about due process anymore or civil liberties anymore. Unless, of course, you're a terrorist or a mass murderer, or you're in BLM burning down buildings. The FBI simply cannot be trusted to uphold the rights of American citizens any longer, a reality that is borne out by its own politicized actions. And that is exactly true. And that is where we are today.